Yes, Jerry Connolly died.
I feel badly. He was not a bad Democrat.
No, he was not a bad guy, and he was a good lawmaker. But it's very hard now that we've had 3 Democrats die in the 5 months that this new Congress has taken place. Now, look, the voters are going to do what the voters do. And it seems to me that there should be some type of internal process where Democrats have the ability to sort of say to each other, hey, we need to be able to make a determination. Like, not we're going to put necessarily an age on this, but we need to be able to look around at our colleagues and be honest with them and be honest with ourselves. The idea that Connolly was elected to this position of being the minority leader of the House Oversight Committee in what the first 5 or 6 months, I can tell you, I see the numbers. We can see the numbers of attention and how it wanes and waxes. And the idea that the Democratic establishment or that the Democratic caucus could not make an assessment about, what is what should we do about this position is just insane to me.
Yeah.
And we saw it with, where we also saw this with the former president of the United States.
Yeah, it's a theme. It's a problem.
Oh, but wait, also with the former chair of the Judiciary Committee, the minority leadership for the Senate Democrats.
Yep. We saw that then, too. I mean, Ruth Bader Ginsburg put us in the situation. Good point, Matt. And 6 House Democrats have died in the last 13 months. Sheila Jackson Lee died in July 2024. And then her replacement died in the same district, Texas's 18th district. She died in March.
We like them old down there.
So since this...
We want our Congress people to be old.
In this Congress, in 2025, we've had 3 Democrats die in office, and all of them are in their 70s, and 2 of them had cancer.
Now, the other aspect of this, aside from the fact that, hey, there's a lot of training expenses that we waste. The other issue is that you may have heard that the congressional, the margin that Republicans have over Democrats is razor thin in the House. And this widens it.
Yeah.
At 5 o'clock shadow now.
So I don't know.
It benefits the Republicans. We were laughing at the idiocy of Donald Trump picking Mike Waltz and Elise Stefanik for cabinet positions when the Republicans had such a slim majority. Turns out we don't have an effective opposition party, so it doesn't matter.
I know the Democrats. There's so many of them that are going to die that I don't have to worry about the margins. Don't have to worry about that.
Sands of time.
Not a problem. Not a problem. All right, let's go into this. This bill, we now know, just as top line, because there's 1,100 pages in this bill, so we're not going to know all the things, frankly, for some time. We know that it cuts $800 billion out of Medicaid, effectively throwing off 10 to 13 million people from health insurance. We know that it's going to cut dozens, if not more, community hospitals around the country because they are supported by these Medicaid payments. We know that it's going to throw millions of people off of food assistance by forcing people who are age 54 to 64 to work. If you have cancer and you can't necessarily achieve disability, I'll read this here. Okay. I'm sure there are literally, this is from Honk Goes the Truck. I'm sure there are literally hundreds of listeners out there with a similar story, but don't have time to I am show. Okay. Developed a sustained food security program. I'm now about to publish a op-ed. Okay. These folks are typically over 54 and simply cannot work 20 hours a week because they are cancer patients. And they're not going to, they're not sick enough to be eligible for some type of disability categorization, which is very difficult to achieve and usually takes a long time anyways. But they're not healthy enough to work.
Yeah.
Those are the people that we're targeting with this 54 to 64-year-olds who have to work now to be eligible for SNAP. I'll also add that the last I read, they're taking off the automatic stabilizing aspect of SNAP, that there would be granted waivers to states to expand SNAP in times of financial crises. So, it may not be an issue today, but if we get another 2008 or we get another COVID, it's going to be a big issue. We know that's what this bill does. We know this bill tries to freeze AI regulations in states for 10 years. We know that it just got recently scored last night that it will cut $500 billion from Medicare. It's going to cut from every other program too, incidentally, except for maybe defense.
Oh, defense? Trump's, yeah.
Defense, the bill itself is going to expand defense by over $150 billion at this
Which
point.
is the military budget and the Pentagon budget increases every year. But this is like a historic spike if he gets what he wants on this. And there's no indication that he's not going to, because Trump has been getting Republicans to agree to things that they typically wouldn't or hadn't in the past, just because of the force of the cult behind him.
And here is, of all people, Rick Scott coming out there and basically saying, like, hey, if you don't want to work on Medicaid, you don't deserve to get Medicaid. First of all, this guy had to plead the fifth. I think it was, I'm not sure how many times it was. Was it 50 times or was it 40 times?
For sure it was a record, whatever it was.
Because his company was involved in
Medicare fraud.
Medicare fraud. Now, again, to be clear, we have seen two examples of two different states, Arkansas and Georgia, that have imposed work requirements on Medicaid. Disasters, both of them. Listen to this.
Of course, one of the sticking points is this business about paying able-bodied 30-year-old men without dependents welfare with no work requirement. Why do some of your colleagues have a problem with that?
It doesn't make sense to me. Number one is, if you don't want to work, you're the one that decided you don't want health care.
Right.
That's number one. Number two, Medicaid is supposed to be for children that don't have health care and people with chronic illness. I remember when my brother couldn't get health care.
Pause it. Hold on. Wait a second. And it turns out it was 75. Fifth Amendment took the fifth 75 times. Medicaid is not for chronically ill and children only. Medicaid is also for low-income people, specifically, explicitly.
Half the births in rural America are covered by Medicaid.
And the moralism that's involved in here, I got news for you. That 35-year-old, you may think is a slacker and a real scallywag for not working and wanting to get Medicaid. But if that scallywag gets sick, guess what? You're going to pay for that scallywag anyways, because they're going to go to the emergency room and all of our insurance rates are going to go up. And you're also going to be shutting down community hospitals around the country who are not getting payments for even the non-scallywags.
There was a study that was done in 2022, I guess it was or 2023 by the Urban Institute, that showed that 53% of adults sleeping in homeless shelter, 40% of people sleeping on the street were employed during the same year that they experienced homelessness. So just to give a set, people like the working poor is the reality in this country.
Ironically, this is a good point made in the abundance book, which is that it's not things like mental health or like not wanting to work. It's the cost of housing that makes homelessness.
And then it's quite difficult if you're homeless, also because you've lost a home base, you may not have an address, to get a job when that happens. So it's a spiral of poverty that he's, of course, blaming on the individual. Rick Scott is the most Republican I can think of.
Continue.
That's number one. Number two, Medicaid is supposed to be for children that don't have health care and people with chronic illness. I remember when my brother couldn't get health care, I grew up in public housing. Today, that child might not get it because of what these states are doing. They get more money to take care of able-bodied adults.
So are you?
Wait, what is he saying? Well, I have an idea. How about expanding Medicaid? How about expanding Medicaid if that's really your concern? Of course it's not. Of course it's not.
I mean, why is he pitting CHIP against Medicaid? That's what he's talking about,
Yeah.
right? There's 8 million kids on CHIP by my last count, 70 plus million people on Medicaid. And
here is Steve Scalise saying the same thing about Medicaid and trying to make it about
laziness.
I guess the number of 34-year-olds in the basement playing video games. We have got 10 to 13 million of these people apparently on Medicaid right now because that's who they're kicking off. That's a lot of people sitting in the basement playing video games. Go ahead.
But we do put some constraints in place in terms of work requirements and say, if somebody's able-bodied and they can go get a job and they're living in their mom's basement playing video games, I'm sorry, you got to go get a job. This program was designed for the truly needy, the disabled people, pregnant women, seniors. Those are the people we're going to help more by shoring the program up. And so why would you want a runaway program that's going bust right now, which is what we have? Let's get the program back on track. And we do that. But clearly there were a lot of discussions along the way. Some of us that would like to go further. But this is where we are in the bill. But the work requirements are going to be significant reforms to get people back in the workforce. And I think ultimately that's a good thing to take somebody who's fully able to work to get back to work.
Yeah, and this also will put them into the Affordable Care Act exchange. So that means that they have to go to the private insurer. The Affordable Care Act, the patient protection part had some success, and uninsured rates have gone down as a result of it. But the Medicaid expansion was a big part of that too. So that's what they're trying to push: more private health insurers getting money.
That was Steve Scalise, aka, according to himself, David Duke without the baggage, talking about how lazy people are.
Yeah, KFF Kaiser has the stats on this. 44% of Medicaid adults we're working full time. 20,
then you have another 20% that are working part time. So 64% of Medicaid recipients who are ages 19 to 64, because there's a ton of kids on Medicaid. 64% are working.
This graph I sent
pop up this graph.
This up. Yeah.
I'm sorry, I thought we had that up already. And then those not working, 12% not working due to caregiving, because of course we don't have any way in which to pay for care for people's parents. Another 10% are not working due to illness or disability, but who knows if that crosses the threshold of what constitutes disability, because the disability requirements in this country are extremely difficult to meet. Then you have 7% who are going to school. We had that story that we read yesterday. I think it was about a nurse going to get another degree, also dealing with cancer treatments. They would be not eligible for Medicaid under these requirements. And then there's another 8% who are either not working due to retirement, how dare they, They retired early. Inability to find work or other reason. So the worst case scenario is that 8% of them all are just morally despicable.
Playing video games.
And playing video games.
In their grandma's
have
basement.
no reason, and they're just basically walking around, enjoying life without any income, but knowing that they have Medicaid. Like
Not serving a single capitalist.
exactly, like walking around, living large.
Not making money for anybody else.
Right.
I wonder what percentage of that is literally like, people who have inherited money and are just like.
Yeah.
There's probably some people like that.
But it's probably it's probably a significant portion of those people are just like retired before 65. That is my assessment. That would be my guess.
And I got news for you. If you are working, if you are, many people work and it just takes such a toll on their body that by the time age 55, they simply can't make it to Social Security time. Others may have been looking for work and given up looking because they had been, it's very hard to find a job. You get fired at age 58 or 60. Hard to find a job in your 60s.
Yep.
So that's where we're at. Now, the interesting thing about this, too, is that after all this, after all the problems with this bill, we know the distribution of the tax cuts go more to the wealthy than anybody else. We know the cuts go to the poor more than anybody else, Medicaid, SNAP. We know that it also messes with AI regulation in the states. I don't know how they squeeze that into the reconciliation bill. Maybe that'll get stripped out in the Senate. The other thing is it blows up the deficit to the point where it's now clear it could trigger sequestration, which involves more cuts to all of these programs across the board. I am old enough to remember just 10 short years ago when the deficit was the most important thing in the world to Republicans. It was the most important thing. Now, I will say this, the bond markets, there's a reason why Moody's came out and lowered the
U.S. credit rating.
U.S. Credit rating. And it's because they are concerned about these tax cuts. Because if you make these tax cuts permanent, there's one thing that's for sure. At one point, people are going to need services and people are going to be pissed and they're going to vote people out. And it's in many ways much easier to get these services back than it is to up tax cuts. And at least from the perspective of bondholders, whether they're correct or not, we become a far less safe savings mechanism because of these tax cuts. It is no coincidence that this rating agency announced it last week. There was nothing new about last week. We were further out from the tariffs. The tariff, I mean, if they were only talking about the tariffs, they would have said something 2 weeks ago.
Right.
They are trying to inhibit this bill from passing. They're doing it quietly, and they're saying, things don't look good with this teed up like this.
Well, also because if it explodes the deficit, that might, in theory, if the collectors come calling, it's going to be harder for the U.S. government to pay it back.
I don't think that we're worried about the collectors coming calling as much as, although that's possible, but people just not wanting our debt anymore. Right. And understand that, that rating in and of itself makes the debt that much more expensive.
Yep.
And Moody's has the ability to change that. They could.
That's a good point.
They could reward, good action as well. But what's amazing to me about this is that the desperation for Republicans to cut taxes, even if the deficit increases, and a reminder, the vast majority of tax cuts go to those in the top 10% and smaller in this country.
Yeah, to quote Stephen A. Smith, they don't care. They don't care about those deficits. What are we talking about here? All right, let's take a look. Cut taxes, even if the deficit increases. Look at this. 60% overall say, cut those taxes, baby. What about Republicans? You know, they're the ones who are supposedly so concerned over the deficit. But even there, 74% say cut taxes, even if the deficit increases. Both overall and Republicans, they don't care. They don't.
Can we just pause on they're supposed to be the people who care about this piece of received wisdom that he repeats there? Because that's not the observation that's ever been true in my entire life. They've blown up the deficit every single time they've been in power.
Oh, no. They supposedly care about the deficit. They complain about it. But if you look at it, it's Republican administrations that blow up the deficit.
Yes. Because
every time.
Because they
every
cut taxes and then there's less revenue. That's how it works.
Every time they do that. Now, I will also say there's been a lot of deficit hawkery on the Democratic side in certain pockets. But the Republicans, that was like their fiscal prudence and responsible with money. And I'm socially liberal, but I'm conservative economically.
It's like the way populists...
What the F does that mean? I mean, it's all just BS.
It's like how populists say they care about Poland, except all those polls.
But even there, 74% say cut taxes, even if the deficit increases. Both overall and Republicans, they don't care. They don't care. In fact, the only ones who do seem to care are, in fact, Democrats. 55% of Democrats are opposed to cutting taxes if the deficit increases. But when it comes to Republicans, we're talking 3/4, the overall public 3/5, they don't care. They say cut those taxes, even if the deficit increases.
You know, it's interesting because I've been around this politics game for a long time. And there are people in this business who will tell you when push comes to shove, voters never really care about deficits. But the polls and the data here show something a little different.
Yeah, this was something I think that came to a little bit of a surprise to my dear friend standing on the other side of your screen, Mr. Berman. Take a look here. Okay, cut taxes even if the deficit increases. Now, you know, it's that 60% we spoke about. But back in 1996, the real last time where there really was a movement to bring that deficit down, bring that debt down, it was just 23% who said cut taxes even if the deficit increases. So we've nearly seen a tripling, far more than doubling of the percentage of Americans who say that we should cut those taxes even if the deficit increases. And that's where we're standing right now, basically, amongst the American public. And why I think that this movement to basically try and, you know, close down Trump's big, beautiful bill by making the argument that the deficit would increase, why will basically probably go nowhere at the end of the day, because the bottom line is voters overall and Republican voters especially say we want to cut those taxes even if the deficit increases, which is far, far different from where we were back in 1996 when, of course, Bill Clinton was president and we had a Republican House and a Republican Senate really trying to bring that deficit down.
Well, you bring up Clinton. You know, I was alive during the Clinton presidency. You barely so. And they actually had a budget surplus for like a minute there. But that didn't mean the national debt went.
Okay, incidentally, the budget surplus for like a minute and it caused a small recession, incidentally. Just FYI.
Worth noting.
Worth noting. But what I think it's, you know, what the question I'd like to see is cut taxes even if you kick 10 million people off of Medicaid. That is really the operative question. And it's also just sort of like indicative of how lost the Democrats have been in how much they have run from the question of taxes in this country. Because they're just so afraid of the idea of talking about taxes and explaining, you know, what taxes are and why they're important and what you get out of society. It's ridiculous. It's ridiculous. Is there more to that? No. Hey, folks, don't forget to hit the subscribe button and check out our daily show. We do it every day at 12 p.m. Eastern for about 2.5 hours. We even take phone calls. You should check that out.